I'd like to call to order a regular meeting of the Watchung Borough Board of Education on March 10th, 2022 at 7 p.m. May we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Welcome to a meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Watchung. Please be advised that this and all meetings of the board are open to the public and media, consistent with the Open Public Meetings Act, and that the advance notice required therein has been provided. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Watchung at which formal action may be taken. The public will have an opportunity to be heard as shown on the agenda at points in the meeting provided for the public to address the board. Members of the public also have been given the option to submit public comments to the board secretary via email or written later, no later than 24 hours in advance of the meeting. Individuals submitting comments via email or written letter must state their names and addresses. Recording or photographing other than for private personal use requires the consent of parents/guardians whose children may be included in the image. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Balboa.
Here.
Mr. Buccarelli.
Here.
Mrs. Harvey.
Here.
Mr. Ingracia.
Here.
Mr. Kraft.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Here.
Mrs. excuse me, and Mrs. Murad.
Here.
Ms. Savani
Here.
and Mrs. Scharf.
Here.
Everyone is here.
Can I have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second, Rich.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Pepe, can you please read the reason for us going into executive session?
Whereas the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4-11, permits the Board of Education to meet in closed session to discuss certain matters. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Board of Education adjourns to closed session to discuss a matter rendered confidential by federal or state law, student matters. Be it further resolved, the minutes of this closed session will be made public when the need for confidentiality no longer exists. The closed session will be followed by an open session where action will be taken.
Can I have a motion to come out of executive session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we're going to go into board member ethics training and the CSA evaluation training by Gwen Thornton, our New Jersey School Board Association representative.
Hi, Gwen. Good to see you again. Good.
Can't see all of you. I want to be able to see all of you. So good evening. It is a pleasure to be back in Watchung. Thank you for inviting me in to do your annual ethics training. It's a pleasure to be here. And so we're going to begin. As you know, the annual ethics training is part of CUSAC, and it's really about making sure that the conduct of boards of education is such that it maintains the public trust and confidence by having a series of pieces that put into place what the expectations are for Board of Education members. So the provisions of this act not only apply to board members, but also to school leaders, as well as charter school and Renaissance school boards of trustees, all across the state of New Jersey. Part of the rationale for ensuring that we do this is that there are indicators in the governance district performance review of the New Jersey Quality Single Accountability Continuum that do require boards of education to annually engage in a discussion around school board ethics. As you know, the School Ethics Commission, which is not the Securities Exchange Commission, which is what I used to think SEC stood for at one point in time, adjudicates complaints against Board of Education members, but also issues advisory opinions. The act is put into place, establishes the existence of the School Ethics Commission, outlines various conflicts of interest, also articulates the mandatory training program that boards of education across the state must engage in, as well as requires a financial disclosure statement that all boards of education members must complete by April the 30th, or if you're appointed at a different point, you have 30 days after your appointment to a Board of Education to complete that. So that's something that you should have received recently, I would think, from directly from the SEC. Each board member is notified at your district email, and you can complete that form online at your leisure. Not like the old days when we had to fill it out in duplicate by hand and copy it and hand sign it. They've made it really easy for all of you to do, which is wonderful. Mandated training, if you have not attended yet, you would be well advised if you can, especially for new folks who are in their first year of service to the board, may wish to consider doing their new board member orientation training as soon as possible. For the rest of you, you are required in your second year and third year of board service of your first term to complete mandatory training. And then if you seek re-election and are re-elected in the first year of any term subsequent to the first, you are required to attend mandatory training as well. All of those are available both online and in a virtual in-person, which is a contradiction in terms, program with a live presenter remotely. Gov4, though, currently, for those of you who may need Gov4, is currently not available online. It's being revised, and it should be available in the next 2 weeks. So be patient. If that's something that you need, it will be available very shortly. The School Ethics Commission is composed of 9 individuals, 5 citizens, 2 board members, and 2 school administrators. No more than 5 members of the SEC can be from the same political party. As school board members run in nonpartisan elections that are not tied to any political group, the SEC reflects that same virtue in that it is not aligned to any particular political party. It is nonpartisan as well. It's interesting to note that in order for an advisory opinion to be made public, there must be 6 members of the SEC available at any given point in time. SEC members are appointed by the governor and serve 3-year terms, but there are a lot of folks who have been on there a lot longer because the governors have not been, in the last several governors, good about making sure that the SEC is fully staffed. So we can go years without an advisory opinion and then get 15 of them at one time when they finally have 6 members around to issue those. Next slide, please. Advisory opinions are issued on a prospective basis only. If you think you might have a potential conflict, you can ask the SEC for an advisory opinion. You write to them, lay out the facts of the situation, and ask them to weigh in. And then you will have a clear understanding of what you are or are not permitted to do. You can't ask after you have voted on something that might be a conflict or participated in something, only on a prospective basis, but it's very, very helpful. Sometimes advisory opinions have such widespread state impact on Board of Education members, they make them public. If they make an advisory public, they remove the district name and the individual board member's name, but it is then publicized as an advisory opinion. And it is the expectation of the SEC that board members will be aware of advisory opinions that are made public because they apply to all board members across the state. We routinely publish those in school board notes, which you should all be receiving in most instances electronically. I'm sure you're receiving them. It may look like more junk mail from us, but please don't pass it by. At least scan it to make sure that there may be some advisory opinions in there that you'd want to see. Okay. They also adjudicate complaints. Anyone can file a complaint against a Board of Education member, any citizen, any other board member. Someone who doesn't even live in your community can file against a board member, which would make it seem fairly wide open. But there is a provision in the law that says if someone files a frivolous, knowingly files a frivolous ethics charge against a board member that they know has no basis in fact, they can be fined up to $500, and they have exercised that. I'm sure you can't be surprised that election time, no one would ever file a frivolous complaint, but it does happen periodically. And so they have exercised that. They do have the authority to fine you as a citizen or a board member if you file a frivolous complaint against another board member. Also, the SEC has a number of penalties they can issue for someone who violates the law. They can issue you a reprimand, which is simply exactly what it sounds like. It's probably what all of you say to your children when they do something they shouldn't. Don't do it again. That's a reprimand. A censure is a little bit stronger, and that censure must be read at the next board meeting after it is issued and read out loud into your board at the board meeting, public board meeting, and put into your minutes so that it's a very public rebuke. They can also suspend you for a specific period of time. Typically, that happens when people fail to complete their mandatory training within the year that they have to complete that training, and they will suspend you until such time as you complete that training. They also have the authority to remove you from the board. They have also exercised that as well. So in 2021, they issued 20 opinions were requested, advisory opinions were requested, 9 were made public. Now it's interesting to note we routinely update this presentation every December and do a look back. When you would go to the SEC website all throughout the month of December, right up to the 31st, there were no advisory opinions. But in January, they decided to publish all the ones they did in December, but didn't update it. So you may have noticed in the last 2 issues of school board notes, there was an explanation to 9 different public advisories that were issued in 2021. They're not in here because we did this in December to be ready for January and the new board year when we typically come out and talk about ethics. So we will be updating this. We haven't yet. In terms of mandatory, if you can go back a little bit, because I don't know these numbers by heart. Thank you. In terms of mandatory training, there were 30 cases. 7 board members were removed. 5 were suspended for a month, and 18 members were reprimanded. 3 were removed for failing to complete their financial disclosure statements. 3 were censured, and 1 was reprimanded. There were 29 ethics charges filed against various board members across the state. There were 2 settlements where the aggrieved parties came to an agreement and arrangement prior to the SEC adjudicating the case. So there's nothing really to talk about because they were sort of settled ahead of time. And 6 were recommended to the commissioner. And I'll talk about those in a little bit so that you know what those latest cases were. And this says the only public advisory in 2020, and we have it up there because it is very instructive. Every school district has a nepotism law that spells out very carefully that family members of board members, as well as family members of school leaders, cannot be employed by the school district after you become a board member. If they are an employee prior to your becoming a Board of Education member, it can be very problematic. And this is an instance where this was a problem. A superintendent went to a new district where he hadn't originally been. His sister-in-law was employed in his new district. She was a lunch aide. There was an opening for a secretarial position, and the superintendent wanted to promote her from lunch aide to the secretarial position at the recommendation, by the way, of the principal of the building who wanted this individual who was obviously qualified for that position. He asked for an advisory because that nepotism law, and you have it in policy, is on the books. And the SEC said, we're really sorry, but you can't. So she had to remain a lunch aide until such time as he left the district. Not that he did. I don't know where the superintendent's from, because of course, all of that identifying information is removed from the case. But it's instructive that he asked and got this advisory. He was told he could not recommend her for the change in position, which obviously would have been a step up the career ladder. I think that's pretty obvious. And that he couldn't have anything to do with terms and conditions of her employment, even as a lunch aide. So that's very instructive for all of us and for all superintendents across the state. And we keep it up here because we like to point out that school leaders, as your superintendent, it applies to all school board members as well as school leaders. And it was very wise of him to get this in writing, so it was very clear, so his board would understand why he wasn't moving this person forward, even though she had been recommended by a principal in the district. Okay. Here is the actual code. I'm sure you're familiar with this and you've seen it before. You're required to uphold all laws, regulations of the State Board of Ed, as well as court orders and all statutes and executive orders. I know that there were many districts across the state that were unhappy with some of the governor's most recent executive orders. And there were boards that really wanted their superintendents to change policy or perhaps change course in the areas of quarantining and masking and the like. But as public officials, because your power is derived from the state, you are state officials. You're elected by your community, but once sworn in, you are a state official. So you are obligated by law to uphold all of the laws, including executive orders, not just the ones we like or agree with necessarily, but by all of them. And so I think that that's an important piece for all board members to really understand, that sometimes there may be pieces of legislation or other kinds of things that the state board adopts, sometimes the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. There may be some of those that some folks find objectionable, but as a Board of Education, you have no choice but to follow those pieces as they are enacted. It's a requirement of law. You're required to make decisions in the terms of the educational welfare of all children and seek to maintain the public schools that meet the needs of all children, regardless of their ability, race, creed, sex, or social standing. Sometimes when you're a board member and also a parent, you may be called upon to make a decision that may not be, in your view, beneficial to your individual child. But as a Board of Education member, you are expected to be able to put aside perhaps your personal situation and look at what is best for all of the children in your school district. And you're required to do that. You're required to confine your board action to policymaking, planning, and appraisal. Frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted those who will be affected by them. Sometimes board members say to me, well, we don't go around and poll every person before we enact a policy. Oftentimes that information around how they'll be affected is gathered by your administration rather than by the board directly. And so you need to keep that in mind as well. And again, you are by definition a policy-making body. One of the most important functions you serve is to develop policy that provides a roadmap for students, staff, community members, parents, so that everyone understands how the district functions and what the guidelines for that, all of the processes that you engage in are. You're responsible to not to administer the schools, but together with your colleagues to see they are well run. You provide oversight and monitoring. You do that through the evaluation of the superintendent, through the development and the oversight of the budget, through the financials that you receive every month. But you are not here to run the district on a day-to-day basis. You have educational experts who are here to develop curriculum to see that the teachers are teaching, the children are learning. And so that is not your function. Also, individually, you need to know that authority rests with the full Board of Education and not with any individual board member. No individual board member has the authority to direct anyone in the school district to act. Only a majority of the board has the authority to direct the superintendent, to direct staff, and or any other employee of the district to take a particular action. And you must be careful that you make no personal promises nor take any private action that may compromise the board. Currently, this is the most often frequently subject of ethics complaints. And the personal promises is not so much the piece, but taking private action. The SEC is hugely concerned with the growth of board member use of social media and perhaps inappropriate use of social media. So that's something just to keep in mind, that as a board member, while you maintain your freedom of speech, there is a balance between your freedom of speech and ensuring that your private actions and speech, which is part of social media, right, free speech, does not compromise the board through your personal action. Refusing to surrender your judgment to a special interest or partisan political group, or using the district for schools for personal gain or the gain of friends. Sometimes board members will say to me, we're going to approve a field trip for the 5th grade and I have a 5th grader. Can I approve that because my child's going to have a personal gain? The answer is yes, because all 5th graders are going. So you are not getting a gain that is any greater than any other member of the 5th grade class that is going on that trip. Okay, this would be an instance where you would get something greater than anyone else in your community would have access to. Holding all matters confidential, which if disclosed could potentially injure individuals or the school district itself, particularly students or personnel, is the focus of this, and making sure that you provide accurate information and interpret to the staff the aspirations of the community for its schools. As we talk about very often, you are the what folks. You are the ones who are responsible for translating the community's vision for what you want students to know and learn and be able to do as they move forward through the school district. The how it happens is the responsibility of the administration, not the Board of Education. You're required to vote to appoint the best qualified personnel after considering the recommendation of your superintendent. Personnel is probably the most constrained area just due to all of the laws, but the Board of Education cannot employ anyone without the affirmative recommendation of the superintendent. It does not require that you vote yes on every recommendation for a particular employment, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that you can say to the superintendent, we don't want candidate Y, we want candidate X. If the superintendent does not want to recommend candidate X, the Board of Education cannot employ them. Okay. You're required to support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. And that again is a really important piece for you to remember, and make sure that you are supportive of the efforts of the staff. You can move forward. Okay. So here are some of the decisions. A board member distributed flyers urging voters of a particular political party, indicating that the complainant was the leader of a radical group who was going to take over town government, and he used his title as a board member and had no disclaimer. Anytime a board member wants to write a letter to the editor or to Patch, or the newspaper, if you still have one in your town, very few towns anymore have those, but some do. You must indicate that what you are writing is your personal opinion, that you are not speaking on behalf of the board, but you are in fact a Board of Education member. So you have to be very clear. And later on, I will show you the SEC has finally come out with very specific language around the disclaimer. This applies to social media in the same fashion as it does to print as well. So if you're going to post something, you need to make sure that you're very clear that this is your personal opinion. It's not reflective of the board. You also need to make sure that you include only accurate information, in whatever post or whatever writing that you were doing. So in the old days, we used to have to have budgets approved by your community. So people would write letters to the editor asking for the public to support the budget. You needed to make sure that whatever information you were conveying in that letter was accurate and correct. So you couldn't say that the levy on the average assessed home in your town was going to be $300 if you knew as a board member from looking at the budget it was $200, okay? You must make sure that you are providing accurate information. A board member in a public meeting threatened a coach's job and had done so in the previous year. That is a violation. He was suspended for 3 months. He did this at a public meeting. He did it more than one time. That is not supporting school personnel in the proper performance of their duties, okay? A board member voted to approve the superintendent's merit goals. The board member's daughter was a teacher employed in the district at the time the member participated in the vote. Her argument was, well, it passed even if I didn't vote. They didn't care. If you have a family member employed in the district, you are conflicted. You may not participate in the terms and conditions of employment or the evaluation of the superintendent if you have a family member employed in any capacity within the school district, okay? Doesn't matter where they are in the chain of command. It doesn't matter if they're a lunch aide or a bus driver, if you have your own bus fleet, of course, not through a vendor, or a teacher or a supervisor, you cannot participate, okay? A board member voted to approve the use of district facilities to an organization from which he derived income. Again, that's a penalty because it's a conflict of interest to get a benefit from the district that is greater than some other member of the public. And this one is interesting in that it was just a stipend from a church facility, a non-for-profit, and they still found it problematic. It was not a great deal of money that you would think would influence, but again, they're very clear, you can't derive income. Okay. A board member wrote an op-ed endorsing a candidate for the board, included the disclaimer. The op-ed included multiple references to his position on the Board of Education and a pretty lengthy discussion around board business throughout this op-ed, okay? So they said, yes, it is still a violation. So while he had included the disclaimer, the nature of the writing was so focused around the board that it eliminated the value of the disclaimer. This is important because you need to know that even if you include the disclaimer, if you then go on to a diatribe about board business and discussions, it is likely they will find that to be a violation, that a disclaimer alone is not sufficient. It's the content of what is written that is important. They are really trying to make a point here to board members around the inappropriate use of social media for discussions around board business. Board business appropriately means to be discussed here at the board table at a publicly advertised meeting of the Board of Education that is open to all members of the public, that they can observe your deliberations of the district's business. A board member on Facebook page made anti-Muslim, racist, incendiary, and offensive comments, so much so that the governor called for this board member's resignation, along with other state legislators and so forth. This was not just a one-time off-shot kind of incident. It was pretty horrific. Again, it was found he was censured, but by the time this happened, he had resigned from the Board of Education. So here is the actual language they want you to use. The following statements are made in my capacity as a private citizen and not in my capacity as a board member. These statements are also not representative of the board or its individual members and solely represent my own personal opinion, okay? And they noted, again, that it's the substance of the statement or the post that can render that disclaimer meaningless. And this is a real switch from what they have held previously. So they are getting very serious about the need to not have so many issues be coming forth based on people using social media for this purpose, okay? And This one is up here not because it was done this year, it was written in 2020, but I love the language in this. Public words which derogate from the mission of the Board of Education serve no purpose, create unnecessary hostility and animosity with within a community, and ultimately have the greatest detrimental impact on the very people that respondent is tasked to serve, the students. Okay. And although the commission acknowledges the sanctity of the First Amendment, there's that balance, right? Words that deliberately cause divisiveness should have no place in the educational setting. I think that is really clear. It's really strong and should help all of us understand the importance, of thinking before we dash off a post after a particularly difficult or contentious Board of Education meeting. I used to say to my board members, you can go home and write an email, save it as a draft, don't send it, and then the next morning, hit delete. We are composing a list of suggestions for board members around social media, and the title of it is No, don't even think about it. Okay, which is half in jest, but half not. All right, because our goal, of course, is always to make sure that you stay within the bounds of what is appropriate and correct. And I will tell you that the lion's share of all board members do that. But we need to make sure that everyone has this information. It's not because we think you're not great people. I was a board member for a decade. I think you're awesome. And I love doing this job because I get to work with all of you who give your time so freely to kids. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that, I'm shaking my finger at you, because I'm not. But all of you need to have this information. So in summary, it doesn't matter what the medium is, the opinion is expressed, the rules are the same. Make sure you have that disclaimer, and make sure that it meets all those requirements. So, you should ask yourself whether it would deliberately cause divisiveness or derogate from the mission of your school district, which is to educate children and move them forward. Next. So here's just a brief question. There's a board resolution to approve the hiring and an audit firm that you work for. Can you participate? Absolutely not, because you would just, the school is the vendor, and the vendor would be working for the district. It would be a conflict of interest. So they're very clear that you have to recuse yourself if there's a benefit to you or your immediate family, and your immediate family is defined as your spouse and or your dependent children or civil partner or your children. Currently, the way it's written says your children who reside in the household, but the School Ethics Commission currently is looking at revisions to language, and the new revision, if adopted, which I fully expect that it will say that your dependent child is dependent by virtue of who claims them on their income tax, federal income tax return, because there are situations where you could have a dependent child who does not reside within your household, but you may be providing the majority of support for that child in whatever residence they're living. Okay. So who qualifies as a relative? Under the School Ethics Commission, it's spouse or dependent child. But under the nepotism definition, there is an expanded list of relatives. And we've talked about this in preceding years. It's almost everyone you can think of that you're related to that you actually know, and maybe even some folks you don't. Children, stepchildren, sons, daughters-in-laws, son-in-laws, siblings, stepbrothers, stepsisters, half-brothers, half-sisters, parents, step-parents, grandparents, grandchildren, aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews. They have papered the waterfront with relatives. When I sat on the board, it was just my family that would have been a conflict of interest, meaning my brother and my sister, but not my husband's. But they've now expanded this so it includes your spouse or civil union partner, as well as all of those other individuals. So whether they're yours related to you or your spouse by blood, marriage, or adoption, they are using this expanded definition for the ethics. Even though it appears in the nepotism law, this expanded definition is being applied to the Code of Ethics. So that is why we pointed out, as well as to conflicts of interest. The district has an opening for an LDTC. It would be a perfect job for your nephew who only lives 2 towns away. Can the district hire your nephew? No, they cannot. The board is meeting to discuss the superintendent's performance evaluation. Your daughter is a substitute in the district. Can you participate? No, she can substitute anywhere else and you would be unconflicted. But as long as you have a family member employed in the district, you are conflicted out of participation. You may also, as a board, not hire a relative of a board member or chief school administrator, which is the nepotism. And again, we've talked about it already. If the relative already works in the district, we've talked about what those conflicts are. You can move forward. The board votes to approve a memorandum of agreement with your local education association. You're a teacher in another district. Can you participate in the vote? The answer is yes, you can, absent any other conflicts. Those other conflicts would be if you're a teacher in another school district in the similar or the same statewide union, NJEA, American Federation of Teachers, there are some actually Teamsters as well. You could vote as long as you're not a building rep of the association where you teach, you're not an officer of the association where you teach, and you're not on the actual negotiations team of the district where you teach. That's considered heightened union activity. You can vote after the memorandum of agreement is done, as well as all of the salary guides and the entire agreement has been costed out. You can vote. We're talking about the strict legal definition of whether you can or you can't. There are some instances where perception is important. And just because you can does not mean that you should. It's a judgment call. And as board members, sometimes you may need to make those judgment calls around perception rather than just the legal definition of what's a conflict. We have a chart that's in your folder that you can sort of look at that just talks about what I just talked about. So, again, if you have a family member in your district that works in the district, you cannot participate in negotiations for the teachers, nor can you vote on the contract. If you have yourself as a board member or your spouse or a dependent child who works out of district, you can't participate in negotiations here, but you can vote on the contract if it has all of those pieces again. So you can look at that. And if you ever have any questions, my recommendation is always to run it by your board attorney, who is the final arbiter of those kinds of decisions as to whether there's a conflict. Because these things, again, have changed and morphed over time. They look differently today than they looked 5 years ago. Okay. Other possible conflicts. If you have have a family member who's not in the unit, but in terms of employment, their remuneration is linked to the bargaining unit, you have to recuse yourself. Again, if you have an immediate family member with that heightened union involvement in another district, you should probably double check with your attorney whether to do that. 81018 was an advisory. I pointed out because this is a significant change. It used to be that in the first year of your board service, if you had been endorsed by the Teachers Association for election, you could not participate in negotiations for that first year. They have changed that. They have now said that it is not an automatic conflict unless the financial contribution that the association gives to a candidate, if they give one, is given with the intent to influence the member. So that has gone by the wayside as well. Things morph and change over time as circumstances and membership on the School Ethics Commission has changed. Okay. The doctrine of necessity, I'm not going to spend any time on because it doesn't apply here. I have some boards of education where the majority of the members of a board are conflicted. And so there are insufficient numbers of board members who can vote to either approve the teacher's contract or to approve a superintendent's contract or negotiate a contract or to do a search, in which case you would have to invoke the doctrine of necessity, which would then allow everybody in by identifying for the public everyone's conflict posting it and making that available, and then you all would be able to participate fully. Volunteerism. This is again a change from when I sat on my Board of Education. Board members are not banned from volunteering in the schools, but you have to be mindful of your role as a board member. So typically speaking, board members may volunteer for activities that support their children, whether you're going in to do Read Across America or for a holiday party of some sort or another, field day, those kinds of activities. However, board members should refrain from other activities based on the degree of involvement, how embedded they are within the building, and the degree to which you as a board member, God bless you, interact with staff or parents or students, primarily the students and the staff. Board members should never be providing guidance or direction to any staff member ever. You should not be handling district funds as a Board of Education member ever. So those are the things that they were trying to get at through this. Again, any kind of one-time opportunities to volunteer in the schools is perfectly acceptable. Anytime there's a public event, we always encourage board members to go to as many public events in your district as your time permits. I know most of you work and are busy and have families, but anytime there's a science fair or a choral festival or the Halloween parade or anything that is open to the public, you are always welcome to attend. That's not what they're talking about in the volunteerism decisions, okay? We've again come up with this sort of little simple checklist here that's in your packet and you can look at it. If you can say yes to any of those questions, then you need to verify with the board attorney whether your volunteering is potentially an issue, okay? Because they are the person who would decide. Means you can't be a volunteer coach in the district, you can't be a volunteer club advisor or teach an enrichment class. Those are all kinds of things that used to happen routinely when I was a Board of Education member. That is no longer possible. That being said, you have Park and Recs, Pop Warner, any kind of outside organization, including your Ed Foundation, you can participate in fully. Your Ed Foundation, for example, has a separate 50c3 charter and bylaws, so it is not part of the district, even though its function is to support the district. So that's perfectly okay. Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, all of those things are perfectly acceptable. Okay. Interview committees. This is another piece where the SEC has weighed in on. One or two board members coordinated by your administration, meaning your superintendent, may participate for high-level administrative positions, either supervisors, directors, or principals, but not below that. Okay. They then subsequently came out with an advisory that says that they don't encourage you to do that. So on one hand, they've said you can with your superintendent's permission, and then they subsequently came out and said, well, that probably wasn't such a great idea. Because again, it gets to that day-to-day administrative role of educational leaders. And so that's why it is so limited. And additionally, they have held that you can't participate in exit interviews. If you can't participate with someone going out the door, it doesn't seem to make a lot of logical sense that you can participate in someone coming in the door. However, they didn't ask me. I could have told them that. Just some points to consider. If you have or you think you potentially have conflicts, many boards have their attorneys put together a list of those potential conflicts and continually update it as people's lives change, so that you always are staying within the guidelines and the parameters. And again, always consult with your board attorney if you think there's potential for a conflict of interest and or an ethical consideration. You can always ask for an advisory opinion. I always say it's better to be safe than sorry. Ask ahead of time, and then and everyone on your board knows, and you can move along. Again, make sure you check school board notes for those updates on advisory opinions. because they're there and they're important, and we routinely publish them. The last two issues have had those 9 advisory opinions from 2021 that they didn't bother to publish until 2022. But, you know, the Department of Education is understaffed as well. So I guess that's the rationale for that. Are there any questions around the school ethics that I can answer for any of you? I know I've gone through it rather quickly, but I know you have public waiting and a full agenda as well. My other piece this evening was to come talk about the superintendent's evaluation. Most of you, with the exception of your brandy new board members, have been through this process before and are familiar with it. So I have brought you an updated calendar that you can use to calendar the evaluation moving forward to make sure you are compliant with that July 1 deadline. And for your brand new board members, I've brought you the handbooks on how to do the superintendent's evaluation. And I would be happy to chat with you offline at any time, or the two of you together, if you have questions as we move through that process or get closer to doing it. Additionally, when you attend new board member orientation, you will also be receiving training on the superintendent evaluation process at that time, because the law requires you as new board members to have training on that by statute. So that's part of new board member orientation as well. Yes,
I have a question.
please.
I think, so I just want to clarify, it says maximum 5 from any one political party, right?
Right.
Is that when you are running together, or is it
It-
just overall? in the
No,
9
that's for
members?
appointment to the School Ethics Commission.
Okay.
They're appointed by the
Got it.
governor. They're not running for office.
No, I just wanted to make,
Yeah, no,
clarify if it's
they're
not
an,
us, it's the school.
they're an appointment. They're not running for office. In
And
fact, they're
the-
probably running from office.
The second question is, where it says public words which derogate from the mission of the Board of Education, serve no purpose, create unnecessary hostility and animosity within a community. Does that only apply to social media or any public board
Any-
member comment?
Any board member comment, essentially,
Okay.
anything in writing, anything on social media,
And verbally?
or any speech in
Okay.
public.
Okay.
You know, at home, you can say in the privacy of your own home, whatever you'd like, but not in public.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think just as a general rule, we'd all benefit from less hostility in the world these days, right? It's not a happy thing going on. So any other questions that I can answer for you? I will give you these, Dory, and let you hand them out. Okay,
I had a question, Gwen.
yes,
Anthony and Gracia.
I'm sorry.
Hi.
I'm looking the
How
wrong
are
way.
you? Traditionally, we read the code of ethics at the reorg meetings
Mhm.
at the beginning of the new year.
Yes,
But we didn't do that this year. We thought that maybe we would be doing it when you were scheduled to be here for this. You've obviously gone through it, but do you recommend that school boards do go around the table, or in other ways?
people
read
have been
the-
doing that for 100 years, but I would also
Right.
tell you that we used to do that on my board, and we would read it, and everybody'd read a different one, and then we went on. And that's why it shows up in CUSAC as a requirement for a discussion, because they want to make sure that it's not simply read into the record as another piece that gets done at reorganization along with the other pro forma. You know, all of you readopt the policy manual, you readopt your curriculum, you appoint your depositories for the bank, you reappoint your business administrator, the affirmative action officer. I mean, there are a whole host of things that get done at reorganization that are pretty pro forma. And so I think the intent of the legislature here, and it's clearly the intent of the Department of Education, was that Board of Education members received annual training that goes beyond simply reading it into the minutes to say, yep, check that off, done, and never looked at again, okay? And so, yes, I think it's lovely if people wish to do that. I think it doesn't hurt, obviously. I think it helps to make the public aware of it. But I think this is more useful for Board of Education members typically to really have the ability to hear what has changed, what is important, what is the SEC thinking about, and be up to date on that. So I think there's no harm in it, and it's been a practice in many districts for many years. But I also think the annual training is a much more beneficial aspect for Board of Education members. And your community gets to hear it here. And I'm assuming you either tape these or live stream them, so it'll be available for them to see, online as well, because I think there's a benefit in that. I will tell you, one of the things that I was always most proud of as a Board of Education member was that we are the only publicly elected officials who live by a code of ethics. And our office is in Trenton. And I always say, I keep waiting for our brethren down the street to decide that it would be valuable for them to have a code of ethics. I'm still waiting after 28 years. So I don't know that that answers your question. It's probably a very long answer to a short question, but I think it may help put it in perspective.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? And I didn't mean to have my back to you. I apologize, or to anyone. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. The exciting news is that Workshop Folks is going to be in person in Atlantic City in October. If you haven't had an opportunity to go because you've only been on the board during these past 2 years and you have the ability to be able to be there, I know with work commitments, it can be tough, but it is a wonderful opportunity to network with board members from all across the state. And there are wonderful opportunities for professional development, not only for Board of Education members, but for business administrators, superintendents, facilities managers, your tech guys. There's just a whole host of opportunities for educators to be there. The commissioner typically comes and speaks every year. So it is not as exciting as the League of Municipalities convention in Atlantic City, but it is a really valuable experience. So I hope to see you sooner than that, but if not before, I hope to see you in October in Atlantic City. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Gwen.
you, Gwen.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to board member comments. Are there any comments from board members?
I'd like to clarify my comment that I made at the last meeting, Dory. It's in response to the written statement that was read by our board president. And I've only been on this board for 2 months, and I was told and read in the manual about the importance of not springing surprises on the board table. And so I was surprised that it's, by controversial statements or board actions at the board meeting twice in that many months. So last board meeting, my initial instinct was to distance myself from the statement. So I commented to confirm that Mrs. Harvey was not speaking for the whole board without consulting the full board, and as she did in reading a resolution against Amber Murad, January 27th. So she confirmed that she was simply expressing her own opinions. However, the board's curriculum committee chairperson and the board's vice president quickly jumped in to voice their full support for her statement. So that further concerned me. So in the interest of better serving our constituents and recognizing that parents must be our partners in their children's education, I'd like to clarify my personal concerns. And in 2019, a new vision statement established our schools as places of inquiry and collaboration, where independent thinking is celebrated and a culture of acceptance and inclusion. Given that foundation on which we purport to operate, I found it inappropriate and unfitting for the school board president to deliver a 20-minute soapbox style lecture dismissing and discrediting legitimate concerns brought forward by parents and community members that going back 6 months or more. It was adding insult to injury to deliver this speech after taking away there was no opportunity for the virtual attendance at the meeting. So, there was some outcry for that, but the in-person was if you were in person last meeting, there was 2 hours with all the executive session. And so you were in the APR for that long. And then there was some fairly lengthy presentations from the administration. And then they were treated to this speech that summed up any concerns that they may have expressed either publicly or privately over the past year as simply misinformation, rumors, or gossip. And later in the statement, fake news. So I think it was inconsiderate, dismissive, and not at all collaborative or supportive of inquiry. In at least 5 specific areas that were board president's statement either dismissed entirely or, in my opinion, provided some disingenuous answers to legitimate questions. I think that there were the 2 others wholeheartedly supporting that statement. I just think these concerns have merit and just deserving of engaging with the community who brought them forward. So number 1 was CRT. And I just think that instead of using a catch-all phrase for controversial topics that are all over our national and local news, and then making a blanket denial that anything exists at our local schools, I would have liked to seen some action from the board president on this topic, maybe inviting parents and community members to engage in the inquiry and collaboration that we express in our vision statement, dialogue with the administration or listening sessions with some board members on controversial topics. I've seen news stories, different reports that, you know, these well-run school districts, our neighboring school districts, Warren and Long Hill host events like these. And I'm not sure that we do. I don't think we do. So topics for inquiry and collaboration on this topic might include the new 2022 sex ed curriculum, concerns about sexuality and gender instruction, when and why children are asked to state their preferred pronouns, and more. There should be authentic conversation with parents in our community, not a 1-sentence response designed to shut down further dialogue. And the majority of our role here, as I understand it, is listening to parents and the administration. And it seemed like some were not willing to do that. The second item was with the leveled classes. High academic achievement has been important to Watchung parents and residents for as long as I've lived here. This district has a history of taking academics very seriously, and for years, we had some of the top schools in the state. Mrs. Harvey's comments were the first time I've ever heard academic concerns labeled misinformation. Why not provide honest answers instead of calling these concerns rumors and gossip? The district currently offers advanced accelerated math classes in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. There's no accelerated math classes that I'm aware of offered in 5th grade. We used to offer accelerated classes in English language arts, history, and science too. We no longer do that. Those are the facts, not rumors, gossip, or misinformation, as I understand them. So if parents are concerned about missing opportunities for advancement, why not have a larger dialogue on that topic? Rather than directing each of them to their individual teachers, wouldn't it be more proactive leadership? The third item was very troubling, shaming the PTO for not proactively asking for a cafeteria solution. In my opinion, the PTO and other stakeholder groups should be invited to provide feedback on desired capital improvements before the scope of work was finalized and sent to the state for approval. It's that simple. I don't believe it was done. That's likely one of the reasons the referendum failed. More stakeholders, the more that buy into a school bond referendum, the more support it has. We have the opportunity to do a better job with that this year. In my opinion, there was simply no reason for a dismissive statement to PTO members who felt they were left out of the referendum planning process, especially on the same night that they were giving an exceptionally large mid-year donation. That was just unfortunate, very unfortunate, and very embarrassing. So I'd just like to conclude by, I spoke publicly as a member of the public on the 4th item, regionalization. Mrs. Harvey referenced lying about the board's refusal to participate in regionalization twice in her statement. I have no reason to lie. Call the other districts if you think we're not telling the truth, she said. So to me, the truth is that throughout 2021, and I brought this up publicly in meetings at that time, all the other sending districts were engaged with Watchung Hills to a far greater extent with informed and robust discussion, expressing openness and in some cases excitement about opportunities to share services before arriving at their decision to decline formal participation after careful consideration of specific legal and financial concerns, possibly brought up by the final language that was issued by the state of New Jersey. Instead, Watchung, the Board of Ed, was the first to dismiss the opportunity out of hand, immediately refusing to participate in the hours of webinars and Q&As that were offered leading up to the Watchung Hills initiating the study. There was a quote in the Echo Sentinel from Rich Buccarelli at a recap of one of the board meetings in which the regionalization study came up, saying that the board needed to focus on the referendum. So yes, I think it's untruthful to suggest that this board was just as engaged in carefully weighing the pros and cons of participating in a regionalization study as the other districts. It's true that the other districts arrived at the same outcome 6 months to 1 year later than we did, but what was said in last week's meeting, to me, is not the whole truth. So I just would say that to address concerns as misinformation, that people are concerned if we can multitask, if we have the bandwidth to handle things that maybe they have concern isn't being prioritized. I just think that looking at our goals, it could be argued about the focus on academic achievement, and to me, it's not clear that that's one of those in our 4 goals, that's a high priority. And maybe it's time to change that. Our actions need to match our words. We just don't want to talk the talk or talk down to people. We want to walk the walk with parents and community members walking alongside us as partners. So we can't afford to disenfranchise parents and the Watchung community by dismissing so many concerns as rumors, gossip, misinformation, and fake news. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. And I just wanted to say that your information about how much this board participated in the regionalization study with the high school is absolutely incorrect. So I just want that to be clear for the public, since we're talking about the correct information, because we did participate in webinars and all of those other things that board graciously offered us to be involved in. So it's interesting how you really want to speak to things that you really have no knowledge of. Secondly,
I disagree, Gloria, I'm sorry.
Anthony, I'm sorry, these are my board member comments. I did not interrupt you.
Okay.
And you can disagree with me all you want, but you were not on the board at that time, and we did participate in those. So for you to say that to our community, I think they really need to understand who's giving the misinformation here. Secondly, as I said, I knew what I said was going to be twisted, and that's exactly what you just did here tonight. My intentions were to encourage parents to get more involved with their teachers and administrators, but you obviously missed that point. So, I mean, if this is how it's going to continue with you for the time that you're on this board, so be it. But I know that the rest of us are here to actually work towards things for the children and clear up any kind of concerns that the community might have. We do our best, and we're all here for the kids. And if you don't agree with that, that's on you. But we're all trying our best to make sure that we get the correct information out and engage with the community. And I do have to remind you that a lot of what all of us have been through has been during a pandemic. So having large gatherings, it can be quite difficult at times. But again, we try our best, and all community members are welcome to join us at board meetings, call their teachers, call the administration, and engage. And that's what I was asking parents to do. So sorry you missed that. Are there any other board member comments?
I would just like to respond that I am not suggesting that as an entire board, they're not doing their best. I'm taking specific issue with the statement that you read at the last meeting.
Right, Anthony, but
And I
this
do
isn't.
take issue with the
Just so
regionalization, the
you
way
know,
you're
this isn't a
characterizing
back
that.
and forth. This is board member comments. And like I said to you at the last meeting, my board member comments don't have to be shared with anyone on this board, just like yours weren't. Okay? So I'm sorry you didn't understand that before you made your statement, but I hope maybe this time when I say it again, you'll understand that. This isn't meant to be a back and forth. If you would like to talk about something under board business, you can bring it up at the end of the meeting during board business, and the whole board can have a discussion on it. But at this point, the only thing that's really meant for board member comments is for you to make your comments, and then we don't necessarily get into a debate or a back and forth about things. Do you understand?
I disagree with what you've said in response to my comments, and I just let that be known. I don't intend to.
I think
say
we
much
all
more on the
understand
subject.
that you disagree with a lot of what's happening. And it's
With your
unfortunate because
comments,
there are a
yes.
lot of great things happening in this school district. And it's a shame that you don't recognize
Right,
that.
well, that's not what I'm
Are
I'm
there
not putting
any other
down the
board member
district.
comments?
I'm
Or am I going to move
commenting on
on?
your
Point of
comments.
order, Anthony. Point of order.
I think we
Thank you.
Are there
forgot
any
to
other
read-
board member comments?
Yes.
Mrs. Marad?
I think we forgot to read our vision statement. I think something that's a part of our vision statement. It's through reflection and the ethical decision-making, we continue to learn, grow, embrace differences, and prepare for an increasingly complex, ever-changing world. We just heard Gwen give her presentation, and I'm sure you heard when I pointed out public words which, don't serve the purpose and have no purpose and create hostility and animosity is not appropriate. And I think 2 board members on our board made those statements last time, pointing out specifically comments of residents. And to me, that's unacceptable. It doesn't matter if you are trying to clear, there's many ways to clear any misunderstandings, but I'm sure you received letters as well. And before I came here, when I saw these letters received to the president of the PTO and their entire executive board and many residents, it's unacceptable. That is what your comments have created, hostility. And quite frankly, I'm speechless.
Mrs. Marad, I know of the letter that you're speaking of, which we just received today, and it just astounds me that you are really trying to blame me for what someone else did.
I am.
It is just appalling to
Because
me
it
that you
just-
would even take that position.
If you thoroughly read it, it's extremely clear what it's saying, and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything that's been said here. So I would read all 3
It does.
pages
It
very
says that how
clearly.
can this person be making a comment when they are on the PTO and they met someone at Dunkin' Donuts? I mean, it was clearly a conversation that you had with a resident.
Okay, Amber, I am not responsible for what other people
You're
are
right.
commenting
You're not,
on.
and I'm asking you to be
And-
responsible for what you have said. And you want to know something? I
Amber.
can waste $4,000 of the board's money and the district's money, because when I saw that bill posted on Facebook somewhere,
That-
it was.
You know what? Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes,
Thank you, because I do have something to say about the bill.
please clarify it.
So recently, there was an Oprah request made by a member of our community to see the expenditures towards the attorney costs related to the resolution of the Board of Ed. which we were forced to consider. The attorney fees related to this resolution totaled roughly about $840, which is about 4 hours of the attorney work, including the construction of the resolution statement and consultation. It's safe to say that none of the $840 would have been spent if the board member decided to work within the already established committee structure and address their concerns instead of making a public statement in which they critiqued our only employee, the superintendent,
I didn't.
hence violating his employment contract and putting our district at risk of being sued for this violation. This board member was given an opportunity prior to our February meeting and the resolution being considered to issue a public apology to our superintendent, a choice that was rejected by said board member.
When was it
So
sent?
it's
Can you please
safe to
clarify
say that $840 would not have been spent had the member recognized this legal jeopardy and issued a public apology. What I would also like to share is an attorney bill of approximately $2,520, a bill that is 3 times the amount of the first one. What is this bill for? This bill is for the cost of addressing several OPA requests from our community related to this resolution, training for the previously mentioned board member, and our attorney being present at our subsequent meeting, representing 12 hours of billable legal fees. With our district in a budget deficit, money we could be putting elsewhere. Obviously, there is not just the financial cost associated here. Our administration had to shift their time and attention from the schools, and more importantly, our students, to address the 3 or more OPA requests. Requests, I will add, that resulted in no evidence of wrongdoing by this Board of Education. Let me be clear on one thing. I welcome our community to ask questions of us. I pride myself in having transparency come from this board. However, I do have to question why community members would rather a potential lawsuit be brought against this board, a lawsuit that would have cost our taxpayers money, than this board to do the work necessary to protect itself and our residents. Again, all of this could have been avoided if the board member apologized in public for their inappropriate critiquing of the superintendent's performance. So please make sure that next time anyone wants to accuse me of wasting money that could definitely go to children, please get your facts straight.
You're
And
right.
place the blame where it belongs,
Yeah.
not on the people who cleaned up the mess of someone else. So if you want to talk about inciting OPA requests and whatnot,
I have.
and the
done any of
words that you spoke at that meeting to get community members upset when you were screaming at most
As a
of us,
parent,
then I think you need to take responsibility for
as a
that.
statement that I made as a parent that I made very clear, and then everyone else started talking, misinterpreting your words, not mine. But here, code of ethics. Okay, can you, excuse me, Adam, I'm talking. I will confine my board actions to policy making, planning, and appraisal. It's a board policy, right? We're putting out a policy for our board district. That is what my critique was as a parent. And not, and if you, again, taken out of context. And training, what was the training for?
The amount of time our attorney had
No,
to
the
speak with
amount
you
of
to
time-
try and get you to understand
What?
that you put our board in legal jeopardy.
No. First of all.
But I
the
see that
time-
it probably
Dory,
didn't work.
Dory, you sent me an email Wednesday, 5:31 PM, the day before the board meeting. That's not sufficient time to sit there. And
And Mrs. Marad, Mrs. Sharp and I spent over an hour and a half on the
A
phone
day
with you
later?
a couple days
No,
after that
Right
meeting.
after you made those statements, we spent an hour and a half on the phone with you, kindly discussing it with you and trying to advise you to
that was
clean all
not,
of this
no,
up.
no, it was not that. It was, we just advised.
It
you
was
to
an hour
step
and a half
down.
of my life I will never get
Same
back.
here. I could have been spending it with my, you chose to be VP and you chose to be president. So that is what your responsibilities are.
Can I
However,
just say though,
that could have been addressed in a personal meeting. And like I said, if it was an employee issue, it should have been an executive session. or personnel matter.
Mrs. Marad,
No,
I
just admit
understand
that
that
the way
this
you
is
went
something
through
you
it-
haven't gotten over yet,
I have,
but
you just brought
But
it
can
up.
we please move on
brought it
to
up.
what we're here to do on the agenda? Are there any other board member comments? Okay, thanks. Superintendent's remarks?
Good evening, everyone. Our school-based reports that our student council representatives deliver each month will return at the March 24th meeting, as will our special services update. You'll hear about some of the great activities that have happened over the course of the month. In the meantime, I wish to congratulate Valley View 7th grader Emma Speeney, who earned first prize in a competition sponsored by NJECC, a nonprofit organization dedicated to transforming education through technology. Emma created a 5-minute documentary entitled Silver Lining, which highlighted the efforts of local communities to overcome the impact of COVID. She received the award alongside her SOAR teacher, Morgan Pistorius, on Tuesday at Montclair State University. We hope to have Emma, her family, and Ms. Pistorius join us at our next meeting so we can recognize this wonderful accomplishment. I'll also note there was a very nice article in the Echo Sentinel about this today online. I also want to congratulate first grade teacher Mrs. Jennifer Dursey for receiving the NJAGC Teacher of the Year Award for 2022. The award is given by the New Jersey Association for Gifted Children and is intended to recognize Mrs. Dursey's dedication to gifted children over the years. In other news, the NJSLA, which I've told you will be returning this year after a 2-year hiatus, we have the dates set for late April and May, and the principals will be sending out messages to their families next week. Now, after working on the mask optional approach and the updated COVID protocols with our local health official and the board's ad hoc committee, I shared the updated protocols with the community on Friday, March 4th. They remain on our website. The mask optional approach and these updated protocols with respect to quarantining and contact tracing are going smoothly. So far, so good. And we'll continue to monitor the data and review the current protocols periodically. Determine that changes will be appropriate, we will let the community know. We'll let the community know. For now, we want to see how the mask optional and updated quarantine and contact tracing protocols go. But as I've said previously, of course, any decisions are contingent on the course of the pandemic and subject to change. The data statewide continues to go in the right direction, and we remain very hopeful. We have not had a COVID case reported to us in March. At our next meeting, we'll present the tentative budget, but I'd like Mr. Pepe just to share the most recent news about state aid as he's refilling the batteries in the microphone.
Hello. All right, we're in business. Today was we received our state aid notification. The governor made a speech 2 days ago, and 2 days after that, they always provide the actual notice of state aid for the districts, and we were pleasantly surprised that we had an increase in our state aid. which was desperately needed as we had many things cut from our budget in order to balance it. And so now, since we just received this afternoon, Mr. Alexis and I haven't had a chance to go through the budget yet and determine which items we're going to put back in, but we'll be working on that between now and the Operations Committee meeting next week so that we can finalize the budget with the Operations Committee and present it in 2 weeks. So that was good news.
Thanks, Rich. And last are the enrollment reports, which remain consistent with 20 more students than we had enrolled at the start of the year. And with that, my brief remarks are over.
Okay, we're going to go to committee reports. Rich, can you give us an update on the Operations Finance Committee?
Sure. We met on Wednesday, March 2nd. So the first topic of the conversation was the fiscal year 23 budget. As you just heard an update from Mr. Pepe, we did not have the information at that time. I think it's, Rich, is it about 154,000 from the email?
That's correct. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the number.
Okay, so I think that we got state aid of an extra 154,000 than we anticipated. Revenues were up, in other words, and we will we'll finalize the recommendations for the fiscal year 23 budget at the next meeting. I did ask the committee members present if there was any new input as to what they saw as needs for the budget. We all felt that under the circumstances, it was the best that we could do given the financial situation. We then discussed the 2020, well, the referendum. I'm hesitant to say 2022 because it's March already and we seem to be moving fairly slowly. The committee reviewed new information provided by two of the potential HVAC assessment vendors. So as you know, we are, it was recommended actually by Mr. Ingrassia, which I think was a good recommendation, that since the majority of the expenditures were with respect to HVAC, that we get a more detailed study than we had before to either confirm or make any other recommendations. There were a couple of engineering firms that were at the end of the day pretty close on price, and we picked the one that gave us the best sample of the work they had done before for another district. And I think Mr. Ingrassia had a question about whether there would be a professional engineer that actually reviewed and signed the report, and that was answered in the affirmative. So I think we're willing to put that on the agenda today for a vote. The committee then discussed the referendum ad hoc committee that we were going to form. The committee was in favor of including representatives from the PTO, WEF, CPAG, IDEA, and the WBEA, and Borough Council. Other general members of the community would potentially join the ad hoc committee. The way we thought that we would do this would be to hold the first ad hoc committee meeting as a virtual meeting during the last week of March. We would, the committee then asked the administration to draft a notice about the first meeting, which after being shared with the committee for review and possible revision would then be distributed to the entire community as well as posted on the district website. The idea here is we have a big meeting, a virtual meeting, people come and give us their ideas. We have the representatives of the various groups talk, and then we possibly decide on how many members of the general community to add into the ad hoc committee proper so that we get representation from interested members. Okay. I've reviewed, just an update, I've reviewed the flyer and I thought it was fine. So we could discuss that too. Shared services agreement, the committee discussed the potential Phillips Field lease agreement with the borough and was in favor of continuing the discussions about a shared services agreement after the lease is finalized. But Mr. Pepe, I think you have an update on that. Could you read the email you sent to the committee today?
I'm sure you mind if I summarize?
Not at all.
Okay, so we had a follow-up discussion to find out, the borough and the Board of Ed are working together to try and put together two things now. One is the lease for Phillips Field to go back to the type of lease that we've had in the past, and also a shared services. We learned yesterday that, today, that the borough is interested in actually trying to incorporate everything into a shared services agreement. So we're still negotiating the terms of how that's going to look exactly. So that was our update, was that they're looking to move to a shared services agreement that covers everything. We're still in discussions with them. We'll follow up with them again. Mr. Alexis and I have been in touch with the attorney to make sure the attorneys are talking. And we've asked them to draft something to bring to the operations committee next week. So hopefully on March 24th, we might actually have something to approve.
Mr. Pepe, could I just go into a little bit more detail on that? Because my understanding from the email was perhaps a little bit different than what you said. Maybe it's just a nuance, but there's been some question about whether we lease the field to the town or whether we do a shared services agreement. We had decided that we would do the lease with the town the way we had been doing in the past. And I think that the gist of this email was that the town was no longer interested in doing the lease, as opposed to just exploring a shared services agreement. Is that correct?
The town is interested in putting it all into the shared services and not having a lease.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear, that it wasn't our decision. We proposed a lease to the town, but
Correct.
they were not in favor of that, but rather would see everything in a shared services agreement. So what I hope is that we can get that done very quickly. I think that we should talk with the Little League as soon as possible. Look, I on the way to work day before yesterday was passing the Berkeley Heights Little League fields, and big trucks that, I don't think we have this luxury, but that said Berkeley Heights Landscaping Bureau. No, wasn't quite that language, but big Berkeley Heights Township landscaping trucks were out there doing the fields. The fields look gorgeous. Fields look gorgeous. And so I really don't want to hold up the season. My understanding is they settled the baseball strike today. So I think we are going to have a full season. And no, I think, kidding aside, we really need to get on this. We should talk to the Little League, make sure that we have a license agreement or form of agreement that is recommended by an attorney with them in shape for when we sign the shared services agreement. Finally, Mr. Pepe shared with the committee a plan to increase the tuition rate for the district preschool program from $800 per month to $850 per month to increase the proportion of costs being offset by parent-paid tuition. The committee was in favor of increasing the rate. We had a pretty fulsome discussion on this, and we think it's competitive with, at least more competitive than with other private services in the area. And I don't know that I mentioned the price of the HVAC study, but it is, I think, $8,500.
Yes.
That's all I had.
Thank you, Rich. Okay, so we're going to go to comments from the public on agenda items. We welcome input from the public. There are 2 times during the meeting when the public is invited to speak. The first opportunity to comment on agenda items only is now. The second opportunity for public comment is towards the end of the meeting. Total time allotted for public comments is 30 minutes. Before you make your comment, please state your name and address. In the event it appears the public comment portion of the meeting may exceed 30 minutes, the presiding officer may limit each statement made by a participant to 3 minutes duration. Comments submitted to the board secretary prior to the meeting will be read first. Our public forums are not structured as a question and answer session, but rather are offered as opportunities to share input with the board. In instances where the board feels a response is needed, the presiding officer or superintendent will address the comment. New Jersey statutes do not permit the board to discuss personnel or hiring in public session. Names of students should not be used. Mr. Pepe, will you please read the statement due to recording of this meeting?
Members of the public should consider their comments in light of legal rights of those affected and identified in their comments, and be aware that they are personally, legally responsible with potential liability for comments that they make to the board. The board shall not be held liable for comments made by members of the public.
Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on to action items. Jen, can you please move administrative items?
Yes, I move A1, approve updated COVID-19 protocols. A2, approve 2022-2023 district preschool program and tuition rate. A3, approve agreement for educational services with the Learning Center at Four Winds Hospital. A4, affirm superintendent's HIB report. A5, affirm superintendent's HIB report. A6, affirm superintendent's HIB report. A7, affirm superintendent's HIB report. A8, affirm superintendent's HIB report. A9, approve annual appointments revised.
Is there a second?
Second, Rich.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Barbella,
Yes.
Mr. Buccarelli,
Yes.
Mr. Ingracia,
Yes.
Mr. Kraft,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Murad,
Yes.
Ms. Sedvani,
Yes.
Mrs. Scharf,
Yes.
Mrs. Harvey.
Yes.
Motion's passed.
Kevin, can you please move personnel items?
Yes, I move personnel item B1, appoint 2022 extended school year coordinator.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Barbella,
Yes.
Mr. Buccarelli,
Yes.
Mr. Ingracia,
Yes.
Mr. Kraft,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Murad,
Yes.
Ms. Sedvani,
Yes.
Mrs. Scharf,
Yes.
Mrs. Harvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Rich, can you please move operation items?
I'd like to, but unfortunately I can't access the new resolutions that Rich put in on this Chromebook. So if Mr. Pepe could give me a copy or. Okay, it's easy. Item C1, rescind the approval of a contract for an independent engineer HVAC assessment. And then item C2, approve the contract for an independent engineer HV assistant assessment, attachment 3.
Is there a second?
Second, Anthony.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Barbella,
Yes.
Mr. Buccarelli,
Yes.
Mr. Ingracia,
Yes.
Mr. Kraft,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Murad,
Yes.
Ms. Sedvani,
Yes.
Mrs. Scharf,
Yes.
Mrs. Harvey.
Yes.
Motion's passed.
Adam, can you please move curriculum items?
Yep, I move D1, approve Valley View field trips.
Is there a second?
Second, Kevin.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Barbella,
Yes.
Mr. Beccarelli,
Yes.
Mr. Ingracia,
Yes.
Mr. Kraft,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Murad,
Yes.
Ms. Sedvani,
Yes.
Mrs. Scharf,
Yes.
Mrs. Harvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Joe, can you please move policy items?
Sure. Move E1, approve policies and regulations for second reading and adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Barbella,
Yes.
Mr. Beccarelli,
Yes.
Mr. Ingracia,
Yes.
Mr. Kraft,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Murad,
Yes.
Ms. Sedvani,
Yes.
Mrs. Scharf,
Yes.
Mrs. Harvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, we're going to move on to any board business. We don't have anything listed, but is there any other board business to discuss?
If I may, Mr. Alexis, and I'm not putting you in this, but we've discussed this many times, and I heard it at the last meeting, and I heard it again this meeting. You know, all three of my children have attended these schools, Bayberry through Valley View, and my son and daughter are now up at the high school. Can you explain the leveling of the classes? Because to my knowledge, and as we've discussed many times, I believe that only happened, the math has always been leveled, yes, but the English and the science, and science I'm not even sure about, but it was only for a short period of time that occurred. Can you clarify that?
Also, what leveling means?
What I recall, there had been a change that science classes. When I began in 2019, the science classes were leveled, I believe, but I think that may have been the first year of that approach, and the language arts classes had been leveled.
And that I would.
I don't know how long ago, how far back that went. I'd
Well,
have
and
to
I
do a
would
little bit
confirm
more
it on my
institutional
end
research.
personally, that my child, who was in 8th grade at the time, that was the first time that we experienced it as a family. And she's now a sophomore at the high school. But it was a predecessor, if you will, of yours who had started that. And then when you came in, you looked at it and.
Well, we were also in the midst of, the COVID pandemic too, and we had to change schedule. So that played a role also, but I know that we have this on the curriculum committee agenda to examine and discuss. And I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
And do a little
I
bit more
just-
research.
Because, being on curriculum now for 3 years, it has been, and, again, having children in these schools, I followed the bouncing ball, and it's not something that went on for a very long period of time. That's what I wanted to just kind of make clear to everyone. It's not like it's something that had been going on for 10, 15, 20 years. I believe it maybe went on for 2 years. Okay, thank you.
I guess I would just add to that. I guess it depends how far back you want to go, right? To see what was done there. But that's where I welcome that kind of discussion and opportunity for parents to give their feedback on the subject also.
I have something. We had ethics training today, and it did cross my mind to say, we had the perfect case study here. Can a board member make comments sitting at this dais and say, I'm talking as a parent? And we all know the incident we're talking about, Mrs. Murad, right? And I did, because I thought, this is kind of behind us. I want to get to positive things. I don't want to make another big deal about it. It's been in the papers. We've been criticized as a board for not cooperating, for being sort of petty, right? And so I said, no, don't open that can of worms again. You could ask Gwen. I'm pretty sure I know what her opinion would be, but let's not go there. Then we start talking about how much money the school district spent on the attorney, and the whole thing gets opened up again. You know, in the world of cause and effect, but for those comments, we would not have incurred those attorney's fees. That's just a fact. It's just a fact. I'd like to put it behind us. I don't really want to talk about it anymore. I'd like to concentrate on making this district the best we can for the children, and not having these ad hominem debates that, you know, I mean, I could go home and I could write like a 4 or 5 page board comments for the next meeting. And believe me, I'd have a lot to say. I'd have a lot to say. But I don't want to do that. I just want to work together as a team and get things done for the school. Thank you.
I'd like to second that. I think the training today that Gwen provided was really good. I think there were a few things that jumped out at me as to what the responsibilities of a board member are as being officials of the state. I thought that was really good. And the closing remark that she made about school officials must always be cognizant of their responsibility to protect the public trust, to honor their obligation to serve the interest of the public and the board, and to periodically reevaluate the existence. I thought that was really powerful. I second that, Rich. I'd like us to move forward and do the best we can for the kids of this town.
I agree, Rich. I think any comments that we make, we should be very vigilant, and moving forward, that applies to each and every single one of us. Thank you. Actually, one other thing, as a report, which was missed, it's the Somerset County School Board Association. The meeting was on the 4th. Can I?
I think we were
report
going to
that?
do it at the next meeting because we
Okay.
have 2 meetings this
That's
month.
fine. That's fine. Thank you. I think it applies to this meeting though.
Go for it.
So some of the questions were asked because I think then it's just going to be kind of delay from when this actually started. So the meeting, it was more of a discussion. It was what is the decision of your mask policy when it's lifted? What are the policies for parents, volunteers in the building? That was the other question. The third question was, has your board been affected by staffing shortages? And how do you alleviate that problem? How the ESSR funds were dispersed. Everyone had great inputs on ideas of how they've dispersed the money, not only for social emotional learning, but under that, how it was spent. The one that goes back to a comment that I had made last meeting, and I would like to, I don't know, address it this meeting, or possibly if you can make it, if it could come into fruition the next meeting, that would be great. But it's, do you allow the public to view your board meetings virtually? Are they permitted to participate virtually? And how do you characterize the atmosphere at your meetings? Going back to last meeting, so now that's my update, but the question that branches from that is Mr. Pepe had stated that we have purchased the equipment to potentially provide hybrid meetings. I would like to know, has anyone put any thought into it? What are we going to do moving forward? A lot of districts are doing it. There was, in fact, someone that I can remember was, there was a board member from Union County, and she had, I think they have like not only 2 or 3, it's like 10 schools or something like that, a significant amount. And she said that, they were providing hybrid meetings for their residents and their community. What are we doing? We have the equipment. Is it something that everyone would like to move towards? Because even the borough council is doing it. Why can't we do that? If we have the equipment, or at least try it on the 26th. 24th, sorry. Can we?
Are you asking me?
I am. I'm asking every single person.
Oh,
Well, what I had announced last time was that I didn't think we should take that off the table just because of technology, right? So I said that we had purchased a piece of equipment. We had the opportunity to test it out on January 27th. Unfortunately, our district technology specialist was in Atlantic City at a conference during that meeting. So we still had a couple of little glitches during that meeting. I've met with him and we've discussed those glitches. We think we've identified the reason for them, and we think that we might be able to do this successfully, but we haven't tested it successfully yet. We can't test it without actually having a meeting and using it. So I'll, from my perspective, as far as technologies goes, if that's the will of the board, I think we can give it a shot again.
I have one other comment. Mr. Pepe, question for you. When we were hybrid or virtually, was it transcribed, the Zoom meetings?
We found a feature, I don't remember when this started, but we did find a feature in Zoom where there's a transcription that comes up on the screen.
Okay.
So that did start at some point. I have to go back and check when that began.
So that would be a service that we can give to some members of the community that would need that.
Right,
If
where
we-
it interprets your speech and types
Right.
it on the screen
Yes.
and gets most of it correct.
I was gonna say, it's not, I've watched it, it's not 100%.
Yeah.
But it's helpful.
It's helpful.
Yes.
It's something, but depends on what you're.
There's a difference between transcription and subtitles. That's subtitles.
Yeah. And
There's
it's-
no transcription. That's in my head.
And it's technology, but it's not like it's a pre-recorded and someone again transcribed.
Right. I was looking at the,
Speech to text, and the technology is not perfect. But
Right.
Again, it just depends on what you're used to.
because I was looking at our YouTube videos and it didn't have any of that closed captioning or subtitles or any of that. So that's something to consider as well.
That's a good point.
I would like for the board to make, to have a vote, possibly, to test it at our next meeting. And if it works, to have a hybrid meeting.
can we discuss it in committee?
It would be a policy, right? It would be in policy committee.
No, it could be discussed at every committee. We've done that before where the
I mean, it's-
superintendent brings it to every committee so we can talk about it and
But
then.
why
get
can't we
everyone's
discuss
views.
it here?
No, we can just, you are
I
discussing
know,
it
so
here.
why can't we
I'm just saying like you want to have a vote.
Right, I mean,
And
to
I'm
test
saying,
it.
can you give board members an opportunity to consider that before you're asking them to vote and we can discuss it in
What's
committee?
there to consider?
Oh,
I'm
you
just
you don't want to
asking.
I
allow
think
your
there's a lot of
fellow
things to
board
do.
No, I
members
would
to
like to
think
know,
about things?
I'm asking you, what is there to?
That's
I'm
why
not
our
arguing.
committee meetings
I-
would be good.
I think that if we bring it through the committee, that can allow for board members to have a little bit more time to think about whatever. I'm just trying to be courteous of my
Okay.
fellow board members and not necessarily put them on the spot as you are to initiate a vote.
You
on
did
it.
last time.
No, actually, I didn't.
asked
You,
them
you
to.
were the one who wanted to
Yeah.
know who voted on what, and I asked them
I'm
if it
just
was okay.
asking, all I'm asking is it something that we're willing to try, and that's it? How is that hard to ask people to participate?
I mean, we have
Public
committee
participation.
meetings next week and I would love to discuss it in committee.
Okay.
Because I want to make sure that it's working. I would even maybe perhaps make this, I don't know if you could do it, Rich, but to maybe, I don't know, have one of the committee meetings, you guys are in here, we're in Zoom
Yeah.
as opposed to Google Meet, just to kind of see if there's that feedback. So I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm like,
Sure.
no one's hiding anything. That's how
I'm-
this process works. I just would prefer to discuss it in committee, but I
See,
would like
that's a
to,
fair answer. That's all I want
okay,
to know.
I would
Thank you.
just like to,
Yeah, that's
discuss it,
fine.
but then try it out prior to,
Okay.
to make sure that everything's ironed out.
I would just like to add a comment also, just maybe it would help with some of the technology issues. It seems that the essence of the hybrid or, virtual meeting would be that those tuning in can watch it in real time and also have the opportunity to make comments and to speak at the time that the meeting's going on. So I'm not sure what the importance is of each of us having a computer open, with our faces each, being on the screen. If it's easier to have the wider angle that we're getting on the tape delay, but still giving, so everyone can still hear what everyone's saying and still having an opportunity to somehow have one active laptop or, terminal where people can call in with their questions. I think, I don't know if that's bad idea, or a bad result, but I'm just suggesting maybe as long as we can get that communication and maybe without having all of the separate screens for each person at this table, maybe that would help.
I don't think it was the computers that were the issue because they were all muted. It wasn't that.
Mr.
Yeah, I
Pepe,
mean, there was
what's-
people from off-site that were calling in too. I'm not sure either, but I'm just saying that, what's the,
Yeah.
I would be
understood, but I
interested
don't
in
think that
further
was a
discussion.
complication.
If we are going to have further discussion and not vote today, I would vote yes if we were going to vote today. But I'm just saying maybe we could have it a simplified presentation with.
I think the bigger question is, Mr. Pepe, what is that equipment that you purchased and how does it work?
I wish I knew the name of it.
Sounds like a good topic for the operations committee, and if
But
we've
it's already been
agreed to do
purchased.
that, that would be.
So we own it.
I don't know the name of it. It's basically a device that takes input from two places and toggles between them automatically so that when people are speaking from Zoom from outside of the room and people are speaking from inside, they're not both being fed at the same time. It bounces back and forth. It actually did work pretty well last time. I think one of the issues we had last time was actually that we had board members, or at least one board member, who was unmuting on Zoom, and that's just my fault for not explaining that you weren't supposed to do that. And that kind of created a feedback thing. The other issue is that if the biggest problem we had in January 6th was when board members from home and board members from the room were talking at the same time. And as board members, you're going to have discussions where you go back and forth, and that caused us problems. If we had a situation like we have right now where all the board members are here and the only people speaking from home are during public comment, it kind of eliminates that problem as well, because typically board members aren't speaking until the public comment finishes. So we think that would be a manageable situation. The other thing is, as far as having people on Zoom versus having the camera, I think from a technology standpoint, it's actually easier to use Zoom because Zoom does a lot of the background work for us, as long as we can, fix that double input issue, which we think we have resolved.
Do you think you can test it out on your end prior?
Yeah, well, actually, like Mrs. Scharf's idea, we'll test it out at a committee meeting next week. That's a great idea because then we get a live test, not as many people, but you only need a few people to test it and see if it works.
And if it works, I think would we have enough time to put it on the agenda or let the public know that it's a possibility for it to go hybrid if it works?
We have a certain amount of time that we have to notify the public of how we're going to conduct the meeting.
Okay.
So depending on when it all gets resolved, I'd have to talk to the superintendent to find out if we make that deadline or not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to comments from the public. Please remember to state your name and address before speaking. Seeing no comments, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you for joining us this evening. This meeting is adjourned.